Hello, everybody. My name is Stephanie Zaczek, and I am a second language acquisition specialist at the National Foreign Language Center. Today, I'll be talking to you about how you can determine the level of authentic passages for use in your classroom. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to look for specific features like vocabulary, sentence structure, grammar, tone, complexity of ideas, and the overall purpose of the passage you're evaluating at the beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels. We'll practice identifying these features, and we'll use them to rate a few example passages. Before we dive in, let's talk about some key points. First, why is accurate passage rating important? There are many answers to this question, but one is that when you rate a passage accurately, you ensure that your students are working with content appropriate for their level, including suitable vocabulary and grammar. A second is that it can help improve motivation in the classroom. When a student can understand a passage or even parts of a passage at their working level, they are more likely to feel confident. And this confidence can help motivate them to continue progressing in the language. As they progress, you can start to select slightly more challenging passages to help the learners continue to grow. That said, finding authentic passages can be difficult, and rating them can be even more of a challenge. This is especially true at the beginner level, where authentic passages often contain higher level features. The key is, to the best of your ability, to find passages that mainly have characteristics of the intended level, even if this means taking only a portion of a passage. Doing all of this will ensure that your passage is rated accurately and isn't overly complex or too simple for the intended level. And this will help better lead your students to success. So let's go ahead and move on to the main question we're exploring in this presentation. How do you go about accurately rating a passage? One useful approach is to think about the following guiding questions while you evaluate. First, what words are present? Are they simple, high-frequency words? Or are they mostly topic-specific? Are they challenging, abstract, evaluative? What is the sentence structure like? And what grammatical features are present? Does the passage mainly consist of word lists, or are there short sentences? Are the sentences complex and organized into long paragraphs? Are the tenses simple, or is there a mix of challenging tenses throughout? Also, consider what is the tone and purpose of the author or speaker? Are they presenting straightforward information with a neutral tone meant to help instruct or inform their audience? Or are they expressing personal opinion with shaping with the intent of offering analysis? In this presentation, we will use these questions as guides. We'll start with an overview of a specific difficulty level, and we'll identify milestones and language features most commonly associated with it. Then we'll quickly review reading sample passages in English to demonstrate what you should look for when evaluating passages at each level. One of these examples will be on the lower end of the level, and the other will be on the higher end, except at the advanced level, where we will be only assessing one example text. That said, no matter what level of language you teach in your classroom, I recommend watching the analysis of all three levels. This is because rating effectively relies not only on understanding the targeted level, but the levels that surround it. This way, when you encounter passages that have outlying characteristics, either below level or above level, you can isolate them and decide whether or not there are too many of these features. If there are, the passage likely isn't at the level that you are intending, and you might consider putting that passage to the side. And with that, let's go ahead and begin with the beginner level. So first, what is the purpose of a beginner level passage in the classroom? Beginner level passages ideally help a learner understand basic demands, requests, and instructions in the language that they are learning. So these range from basic survival scenarios to tasks, requests, and directions a person requires to navigate their everyday lives. This level approximately correlates with the novice levels up through intermediate low on the ACTFL scale. And as an example, By the end of the beginner level, learners should be capable of understanding everyday messages and directions like subway and airport announcements, simple weather reports, and emergency warnings. But before we get to the end of the level, let's start at the very beginning. At the start of the beginner level, learners should begin to understand the target language at the word level. So these passages should be simple and feature word lists and partial sentences. They should also focus on high frequency vocabulary like numbers, names, places, and objects. It may even include simple tenses such as the present tense or some basic commands. It's important to note that repetition of vocabulary and basic expressions is essential at this level. So when you are rating very low level passages, try to consider how much repetition is present. The more repetition is present, the better chance that the learner will pick up on that information and remember it, and the more appropriate it is for use at the beginner level. As they progress, learners should begin to understand basic facts associated with familiar topics. So passages at this level might include some short sentences with plenty of vocabulary. Grammar should remain relatively simple, and we shouldn't be seeing long paragraphs quite yet. The passages should mainly focus on building the learner's vocabulary and memorization of common phrases and expressions. Finally, at the end of the beginner level, learners should understand questions, instructions, and simple statements made about topics that are familiar to them or topics that are common in everyday life in the target region. So passages may contain full but short sentences and slightly more complex vocabulary, including synonyms of high frequency words. As for grammar, an additional verb tense or a simple grammatical feature may be introduced at this level, and repetition remains important. So let's go ahead and move on to the global features of the level, things we should expect to see across beginner level passages. The first is tone. The tone in these passages should be impersonal, meaning a speaker or author will be speaking or writing to inform or instruct the audience, and won't typically include personal appeals or opinions. Now, there are always exceptions here or there. For example, you might see some beginner level passage that are emergency appeals for donations. As long as the tone isn't evaluating an action and remains simple with low level vocabulary and grammatical structures, there can be some wiggle room here. Another important factor to consider at this level is the rate of speech. Audios should also have a slower rate of speech to account for the beginner level learners' need to isolate basic words and expressions. If the audio is too fast, it might not be appropriate for a beginner level audience. Now, let's go ahead and move on to our two examples at the beginner level. Take a moment to pause this video and read through the first example passage. In this first example passage, you'll see a set of simple directions for a food donation campaign. You'll notice there are no long sentences here. The majority of ideas are unconnected, and the vocabulary items are simple, one word or two word phrases. Rather than a grammar-heavy passage, this focuses mainly on vocabulary. The topic is also something simple. It's encountered on an everyday basis, food. And it is written in an impersonal tone with the intent to inform readers. You'll also see repetition via theme with references to different types of foods, and you'll see the word canned repeated a number of times. As beginner level learners progress and are able to handle simple passages like this one, you can start to use passages that introduce intermediate level concepts. So let's go ahead and look at our next example, which is a more challenging beginner level passage. Again, feel free to pause this video so that you can read through the passage. This notice is designed to communicate information necessary to a reader's daily life. Like the previous example, the tone is impersonal, the structure is simple, and there is still repetition of several terms that are key to comprehending the passage. For example, road, closed, and its noun form closure. But you'll also see full sentences throughout. some of which have more complex features like clauses and future tense verbs. The ideas are slightly more connected, presenting necessary information about where the road closures are located and what to do about them. Additionally, you'll see a number of words that are low frequency for the level, such as removal, services, approximately, and congestion. These are all features of the intermediate level. They are, however, not entirely sustained throughout, and the familiarity of the topic, the brevity of the sentences, as well as the simplicity of the sequence presented make this challenging at the beginner level, but not complex enough to be called an intermediate level passage. Now, let's go ahead and move on to the intermediate level to see how it differs. What is the purpose of an intermediate level passage? They should ideally help orient a learner to an event, provide basic instructions, or focus on descriptions. They feature information that is typically beyond basic survival and may range from announcements and notices to short reports. This approximately correlates with the intermediate mid, high, and advanced low levels on the ACTFL scale. Generally, by the end of the intermediate level, learners should be capable of understanding objective news stories, often seen in newspapers, magazines, or news broadcasts. Let's go ahead and look a bit closer at the entry intermediate level. So learners entering the intermediate level should be able to handle all of the skills accomplished at the beginner level, but we'll also start focusing on the details of the passage. At the start of this level, passages will be mainly composed of sentences, which are sometimes organized into short paragraphs. These passages should have a main idea, which the learner should be reasonably able to grasp. After becoming comfortable with handling passages mainly composed of sentences, learners should progress to understanding multiple key details from the passage that relate to the main idea. These passages will have longer sentences, and the level of detail within these sentences will increase. This will include more topic-specific vocabulary, as well as additional simple timeframes. At the end of the intermediate level, learners should be able to successfully comprehend ideas at the paragraph level and understand the flow of events across the passage. The passage will feature long, detailed sentences and more challenging verb tenses. Topic-specific vocabulary will likely be seen throughout these passages. Now, on to the global features of the level. Similar to beginner level passages, most intermediate passages use an impersonal tone. So at this stage, passages should continue to be informative and instructive without much of the author or speaker's tone. Rate of speech and audios can be slightly faster. There may even be more than one speaker, but audios should avoid instances of overlapping speech. Now let's move on to look at our two intermediate level examples. Feel free to pause so that you can read through our first intermediate level passage. In this example, you'll see a notice posted about insect treatment in a residential community. It uses an impersonal tone and includes some elevated topic-specific vocabulary like spray, mosquito, tentative, as well as some proper names. Compared to the beginner level passage, notice the passage structure here is much more complex. So there are both simple and complex sentences, which are organized into short paragraphs. These paragraphs feature connected ideas, as well as multiple verb tenses. The passage also includes some specific details about mosquito spray, directions about how to prepare for it, and basic sequences of events. Once learners are able to handle a level of detail in basic intermediate passages, including understanding at the paragraph level, you can start to introduce advanced level concepts. Let's move on to our second example so that we can see how to do this. Again, feel free to pause this video so that you can read through this passage. Like our first example, this is an impersonal report presenting topic-specific information on a less familiar topic. So it has a connected paragraph structure with a mix of simple and complex sentences and tenses. But the passage also features far more density of detail and topic-specific vocabulary. For example, the first paragraph contains main and supporting details with lower frequency terms such as impasse, recover, and legislature. Also note the number of timelines present in the passage, which range from enrollment data in the last year to the current state of enrollment and the university's plan for the future. Processing this information requires the ability to comprehend a relatively complex flow of events. These are all features of the advanced level. However, they're reported in a neutral way with little tone from the author. The logic is easy to follow and relates to a concrete topic. And because it lacks the tone, abstraction, and the general difficulty level that we would expect for an advanced level passage, it is not complex enough to be called an advanced level passage. And with that, let's go ahead and move on to see how the advanced level compares. At the advanced level, passages feature opinions, arguments, inferences, implications, and analysis. The advanced level is also where learners begin to encounter passages with a personal tone. The advanced level approximately correlates with advanced mid and advanced high on the ACTFL scale. And by the end of this level, learners should ideally be capable of understanding complex arguments and analysis seen in editorial opinion pieces, debates, panel discussions, and commentaries. As we did with the other levels, let's start with the features of entry-level passages. Learners entering the advanced level should be able to handle all of the skills accomplished at the intermediate level, but with additional complexity. Sentences will start to become lengthier and may include some figurative or idiomatic language. Passages at this level tend to introduce tone through simple reported opinion. This means that the speaker or author is not providing an opinion themselves, but is citing simple opinions said by others to support information being presented in a factual manner. At the entry level, the majority of the information should remain factual, with at most only a few instances of reported opinion. As learners progress, they should be able to follow the logic of simple arguments, which may include culturally specific references. The passages at this level typically feature tone of the author or speaker or sustained reported opinion throughout. They may include lower frequency grammar features, and the topic of the passage may focus on an abstract idea or theme rather than something concrete and informative. At the higher end of the advanced level, learners should be able to understand and summarize opinions directly made by the author or speaker. These passages will likely have an objective, and tone should be present. In addition, the speaker or author may make references that require inferences on the part of the learner. The topic should be abstract or complex enough that the argument is sufficiently complicated and requires some interpretation on the part of the learner. Now, on to the global features of the advanced level. Unlike intermediate passages, most advanced passages have tone, either reported tone and opinions or those directly from the author or speaker. The rate of speech is faster, and overlapping speech, especially at the highest level, is not entirely uncommon. Now let's go ahead and look at our final example, an advanced level passage. Feel free to pause this video. This passage is especially long, as you might expect at the advanced level. In this example, you'll see a report that looks similar in structure to passages at the intermediate. It has a developed paragraph structure with connected ideas that are designed to inform readers. The details are dense and cohesively support a main idea. Grammar is similarly complex, and the topic is also less familiar. But when you look closer at the elements of the passage, you see a more personal tone emerge. The author uses figurative language like judicial wall, modifiers like groundbreaking and clearly, and describes a lawmaker's response to the legislation as indignant. The author also uses complex legal terminology throughout the passage. In the conclusion of this passage, you'll also see some simple opinions offered through quotes attributed to different people. This is common at the lower end of the advanced level, where the author's own opinions aren't yet present, but simple opinions of others are. Now, today we won't be looking at a higher advanced level passage in this presentation, but in higher level passages, you might also expect to see opinions stated directly by the author or speaker, as well as more abstraction and idiomatic language. Hopefully, these examples have given you an idea of the spectrum of passages you can see at different levels. Think about how different these two passages are. There are some differences that might be obvious, such as the length of the passages, but others are more discrete, such as word choice, purpose, and tone of the author. You'll also notice there are some elements of the beginner and intermediate levels in the advanced passage, and some challenging sections of the beginner passage. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, one of the hardest concepts in reading authentic passages is that natural language doesn't exist solely at one level. You'll see some advanced concepts in beginner level passages, in intermediate passages, and some lower level features in advanced passages. It's inevitable. But the most important skill you can develop when reading passages is to understand how to balance difficulty at the levels. So some passages fall easily into one level, but some will often straddle the levels. Mapping out a passage using the feature categories that we've worked through today should help you make an informed decision about the majority level of a passage. And that concludes our presentation. Remember, no one passage is alike. Passage rating isn't an exact science. It takes practice and careful analysis, but I hope that by using the techniques I walked you through today, you'll feel confident in rating authentic passages for use in your classroom. Thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of the summit.